Okay, I want to move to the cloud. All right, greetings, everybody. Today is Wednesday, June 29th, and this is the Denver Kehillah weekly shiur. We're studying Pirkei Avot, and we are in Parak Aleph, Mishnah Daled, Chapter 1, Mishnah 4. And it's a beautiful, beautiful Mishnah with some really nice insights. We'll see how far we get. Just one point to start. We have Yossi ben Yoezer ish Tzureda v'Yossi ben Yochanan ish Yerushalayim. So these two Tanaim are referred to as a man of Tzureda and a man of Yerushalayim. Anyone have a sense of what that means?
Where is Sureda?
You know what? I had the answer to that question, but I don't have it offhand right now. I saw one of the commentaries that I was studying. Maybe we'll try to look that up afterwards. I can go back, unless someone wants to Google it right now. But what does it mean that they are? So it could mean that they live there, right? But it seems like it's more. It seems more important than that, right? A man of. It feels like they have a real connection to the place rather than just living there. So there's
and also
yeah, go ahead,
it
Stacey.
it seems to indicate some kind of status in the community of wisdom or respectability.
Right, excellent. Right, so there's a really wonderful commentary on Pirkei Avot called Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. I don't have it with me. I don't have the hard copy with me here. But David, I know you teach a lot of Mishnah. Have you ever seen Mishnat Eretz Yisrael?
Rabbani Michelle Farber makes a lot of references to it in her Daf Yomi Shirim. Who's the author again?
It's the Sifrai father and son.
Right. Is it available on like Safaria or?
It is. It's available on Safaria. It's amazing. I couldn't believe it because they're not cheap volumes, and so to have them available on Safaria is a real treat. That's where I cut and paste this. I happen to have the hard copy of the Pirkei Avot and one other Masechet. And they're hard to get in America to begin with. You have to really, if you're going to go to Israel, that's where you get them. In any case, so the Mishnah Eretz Yisrael talks about this and says right over here, Habitui ish ploni paresh b'mechkar kiba'alav shel makom ploni. So he says, first of all, in sort of in the academic study of this word, it usually means that they are the Baal, they are the owner, or they're in charge of the place. O kibitui karov hamivatea osher va'atzma chevratit, or like Stacy said, it represents that they have status and social standing in the place. Lo rak tziyun geography, right? It's not just that they live there, right? Because it seems like it's more serious than that. Then he goes on to say, Ish Yerushalayim vadai einenu ba'aleha shel ha'ir. Can't possibly mean that Yossi ben Yochanan, was the owner or was in charge of Yerushalayim. Ela b'chol hayoter dimut boletet ba ein ledavar mochacha ve'efshar l'shalenu tziyun geography b'vad. But seems again like he had a certain status in that place. Although they admit that they don't know for sure, maybe it is just geographic, but their sense is also that it means something more than that. The reason I love this type of comment is because now it gives us like a klal, a general rule. It's such an important way to learn anything and learn Torah especially, right? Torah is a lot of details, but my feeling is that the way to really sort of master Torah is to master klalim, master principles. And so that whenever there's an issue, a question, or something that comes up in Torah, it's not that we're looking for this specific answer. We're looking to apply a principle. And once we apply the principle, we'll be able to answer the question. Like someone from the Kehillah sent me a text message the other day that someone, and I think this person was implicating her husband, but I didn't think she wanted to do that outright, cooked macaroni and cheese in a fleishik ceramic bowl. And so she wanted to know what the status was. So the way to go about that is not to answer, of course you have to answer a specific question, but the way to answer the question is to understand the klalim, the general principles involved, what are the different pieces involved, and see how they go together. So this too, in a little bit of a different sense, gives us a klal. Whenever we come across this phrase, ish blank, in Talmudic literature. So now we know it could be geographic, but more likely it's about some status that the person had, and it opens up all possibilities of further research to see what type of status and what type of influence the person had in that place. Okay.
Is it could be, I don't know, one thought came to me is when I think of Jerusalem, that's someplace that I know. It's a big city. There's a big population. And the other place, I've never heard of. Could it be some teeny little town or something that's remote? Are we comparing like big city life
Oh, that's
to
really interesting.
kind of small town life?
That's really fascinating, Cheryl, in the sense that these two people are put together as their zugot. Another time we'll talk about the zugot. They shared leadership of the Sanhedrin, and one of them was from Yerushalayim, and one of them was from Tzreida. That's a really interesting point. And I wonder, it's almost like when you have a presidential candidate, they pick their vice presidential candidate carefully, like East Coast, West Coast, or middle of the country, or right, different voting patterns. So it's interesting if we would look at the other zugot also to see if they combine sort of more well-known places with places that were not so well known. I want to go back to this Mishnah and go back to Cheryl's question to see quickly if I recall correctly where we could find where Tzreida is. So this is Sefaria, and if you're familiar with Sefaria, I'm going to look at Mishnat Eretz Yisrael, and here it is, David. You see on the side, Mishnat Eretz Yisrael, and let's see. There was something about Sreida. Here's the piece that we learned. Here we go. Sreida, you see it here, Cheryl? I'm highlighting. Sreida haita ayara kfarit merkazit bitzafon Yehuda. Al Shema Nikra Vadi Sreida. So there is a place called Sreida Valley, Vadi Sreida. Hushmo HaMasorati Shel Nachal Shilo. לפי גודל הנחל יש להניח שגם העיירה הייתה העיירה המרכזית באזור צפון מערב יהודה. So even though we don't know about it, it seems like it was an important place. It was like it was regionally important. Wasn't Yerushalayim, you're right, but it was regionally important. Okay, so there you see, David, it has the Mishnah of Eretz Yisrael, and it's just really a remarkable. It's Hebrew, but very, very accessible, and I find that it really combines like traditional commentary and academic stuff. And similarly, by the way, is Avigdor Shinan's commentary, also available on Sefaria, and he says something really interesting here, because the rest of the Mishnah, right? Yehi beitcha beit vad lechachamim, right? Your home should be a meeting place for the sages. And sit in the dust of their feet, and drink their words with thirst. So what's going on here, right? What's the value of having your home open to the sages, right? What's the value statement that that Yossi ben Yoezer is telling us here? And actually, Cheryl, what you said also really is interesting to me, because he is not in Yerushalayim, and maybe where he was, there were fewer Talmidei Chachamim, right? There were fewer sages coming through, and so it was important for him when they did come through that he host them, maybe. But here, Avigdor Shinan says something really interesting. He writes here, Ma'amaro shel Yossi ben Yoezer murkav mishlosha chalakim, right? 3 different statements. And again, as we've discussed, there are different ways to learn Pirkei Avot. One is we could see each of these statements as standing alone as an individual teaching. And others, like the Maharal, try to usually find some thread that connects various statements within each Mishnah. So this Mishnah has three statements. Um, Hu mufneh el ha'adam ha'pashut min hashura v'korei lo liftoach et beito b'fnei chevrat ha'chachamim v'linhog kalpehem biyachas haroi lahem. So according to Shinan, Yossi ben Yoezer is addressing his comments to the most sort of the most basic, maybe uneducated people. He's suggesting that their home be open to chachamim and that our interaction with them be proper. Why? This is beautiful. Lo kol adam muchshar lehitzaref lechevrat halomdim. So, like if that's what the rabbis are saying, it's such an open statement, and it's a statement that really like reads the room, right? Not everyone could be a Torah scholar. Not everyone can study Torah. However, what can everyone do? Kol adam yachol v'chayav lavo imam b'maga. Everyone can and must encounter and engage personally with Talmidei Chachamim, with Torah scholars. Right? So beautiful, right? That so willing to recognize not everyone. Now in our day and age, I would argue that Torah study is much easier than it ever was before, with things which are translated, right? So many of our most basic texts are translated, and then on the internet, whether it's written or whether it's recorded, there's so much of access to different teachers, different types of Torah. We've talked before about the importance of finding the Torah that you like and find the Torah teacher that speaks to you. And so there's so many options, but yet it's not everyone's, as the kids say, it's not everyone's jam, right? Not everyone is ready or able to study Torah, but everyone can put themselves in a position to be in contact with Talmidei Chachamim. And that's what he says is going on here, that our home should be Beit Vad L'Chachamim, a place where they come and they need a place for a meeting. Sure, come to my house. There's an interesting idea in Torah, in Halacha, which I think parallels this, which is called Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, which is service of Torah scholars, which means helping them get from place to place, just making sure that their basic physical needs are taken care of. When I was in Yeshiva University, I had the honor of escorting Rav David Lifshitz, who was sort of a remnant of the European rabbinic aristocracy. He was the rabbi of a whole town in Poland. His family was murdered during the Shoah. He managed to survive, and I brought him back and forth to and from his apartment in Washington Heights when I was at Yeshiva University, and it was great because you get to see him interact as a human being with other people, and you just learn. Not only did I learn his Torah, I was able to learn from his midot. I was able to learn from the way he interacted with people, and that's called Shimush Talmidei Chachamim. I tell the story often that there was an elderly woman living in Washington Heights. She had a little tiny dog. Her name was Florence, and she was very friendly, and I think a little bit suffering a little bit from maybe dementia or Alzheimer's. And she was just sort of roam around the neighborhood. And whenever I was walking, often when I was walking with Rav David Lifshitz, she would come up to him and she would say, like in a squeaky voice, "Rabbi Lifshitz, how are you? How are you today?" Like in a very New York voice. And he didn't speak English. He spoke Yiddish or Hebrew, except when he saw Florence. And he would say, "Have a nice day, Florence." Like he always made time, to stop and say hello to her. And that's what you get from Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, right? You see, hopefully you see their positive midot. I think that's what's going on here too, right? We hopefully our Torah scholars are not only intellectual role models, They are also hopefully moral role models and character role models. And we get to see how they interact with their spouse and how they interact with friends and with strangers and with people outside of the classroom. And so that's what's going on here. Okay. Let's keep going. Yehei beitcha beit vad l'chachamim. Beit vad hu makom shebo mitkansim hachachamim. A beit vad is the place where the rabbis would meet. L'shem limud Torah hu isuk b'tzarchi tzibur. For studying Torah or to, discuss communal matters. The question, of course, is why didn't these rabbis have like their own place to meet? Right? It seems strange, although we're a shul without a building, so I guess we could relate to this, right? But that's not the common way. So this could be, some of the commentaries suggest. Well, anyone have a suggestion as to what's going on here? Like you have a town, let's say Tzreda, and Yossi ben Yoezer is saying, nonetheless, you should open your home to our, Vad HaKashrut meetings or the Eruv committee meeting or whatever meeting there needs to be. You should offer your home. How come there's no, boardroom or something for people to meet in? It seems like there isn't.
Well, maybe it's a poor town, and isn't the first requirement to build a mikveh first? So maybe they didn't finish building their mikveh, and they have to meet in people's homes.
Okay, good. So maybe their infrastructure is not set. But this seems to be saying, this doesn't seem to be conditional, right? This seems to be saying this should be a common practice, that our home should be like it's like a WeWork, right? Our home should be a shared working space for communal activities.
I think, what comes to mind is when you're thinking that way, then if you want, each person has to have their home open to these, special peoples, so that number one, you have to keep your home clean. It can't be a wreck.
Right.
And then they become accessible. They're not movie stars that you can't talk to.
Beautiful. There is, I'll get there in a second, but that's really, well, you hit the nail on the head, something else that Shinan says. Okay, great. We'll get back to that, Cheryl. Shira, are you unmuted? Did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, I think going back to what he said, that if you should have Torah in your home in one way or another. So if you can't be the one learning, then you should bring people there who can bring the learning to you.
Right. Okay. Right. Excellent. Great. It's so I mean, it doesn't make a difference whether there's a place or not. This is just a value that we should have. And by the way, this is actually quite ahead of its time, because now I think the basic thinking is, at least my experience is, that shiurim and programs that take place in people's homes draw more people to them than doing it at the shul. People's friends come, it becomes a little bit of a social thing. It's a more comfortable setting than sort of a cold, boring synagogue boardroom. So it could also be, this also could be like a pedagogical teaching, that maybe more people will get involved in Torah learning if it's in people's homes. David, what do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, so two things. One is, this is a pretty early care, so maybe there's some historical development where earlier in kind of rabbinic history there wasn't an established Beit Midrash, and they were kind of more itinerant. And then by the time you get to Rabban Gamliel, there's like rows, and where's your seat, and did you lose your seat, and do you get demoted to get put to the back of the hall? And then also that there are a lot of references in the Talmud to the rabbis like learning in the shuk. Like, so these people, even at the time that they were out, they were some of the learnings, like, why were did they just happen to meet on a street corner because they were shopping and they started discussing something, or did they actually plan to meet there to somehow have a discussion?
Right, like a pop-up. Now we have pop-up restaurants, pop-up shiurim.
Right.
Yeah. Some of the commentaries suggest that we're not talking about a standard situation. We're talking about, like you said, an itinerant lecturer scholar who just goes from place to place and shows up, and then we should be eager to open up our homes so they could teach their Torah there. But I like what we've said, all the values involved in this. And here, Avigdor Shanan says something really powerful. Says V'odni keret b'divrei Yossi ben Yoezer hamigama limnoa kichol ha'efshar et ha'pe'er ha'chevrati ha'tiv'i sheyachol lihiyutzar ben chevrat ha'chachamim hamatchila lihitavot b'tkufato uben shar ha'am. Because the purpose of this, says Shanan, is in order to close the gap, the natural social gap that exists between the Chachamim, which seem to be developing now, as David said, and Shar Ha'am. Right? There's this sense, they're the rabbis, and we can't interact with them. And so there's a goal here to try to close that gap. Tzimtzum ha'pe'er al yedei mifgash matmid b'bateim shel pshutei ha'am mavtiach mechad gisa. So why is it important to close the gap? This is really beautiful. She'achachamim lo yihiyu minutakim me'ahavaya hayom-yomit shel ha'chevra ha'yehudit ha'pshuta. Not only is it good for the host, it's really important for the chachamim, so that they are not disconnected from the daily reality of the people, right? How could you answer questions about the daily reality from people if you don't understand their life, right? So going back to the question that I got about the China, right? The first question I asked was, is this heirloom? Is it important? Was it a gift? Does it have some special meaning in your family? Right? You really have to understand situations before one answers them. Not every situation is the same. One of the most, depressing moments that I had in Yeshiva University is I went to ask a question to one of my teachers, a serious halachic question, and he said, "Oh, I've gotten this question 1,000 times. Here's the answer." And I just didn't feel good about it because it was my question. It was my specific question. And it must have been different than the person who asked it before me because they're not me. And I did something which normally you're not supposed to do, is I went to ask somebody else. First, I went to the mashgiach of the yeshiva and I told them what happened. And I said, I really don't feel comfortable with this. I was such a rule follower. Can I ask somebody else the shaila? And he said yes. And then I went to ask somebody else who treated the question like it was my unique question. And that's what's going on here, right? You have to understand the people. So not only is having our homes open to Chachamim good for us, right? It's good for the rabbis. The rabbis come in, their kids running around. Maybe the house is a little bit messy. And the rabbis realize that life is hard, life is complicated, right? You could answer questions out of a Shulchan Aruch, but the Shulchan Aruch doesn't know that there's a Shalom Bayit problem in the house. And if you answer the question one way, you're going to fix the Shalom Bayit problem. And if you answer the question another way, you're going to exacerbate the Shalom Bayit problem. So this is such a great insight. So there's lo yuminu takim me'avaya hayom yomit, that they should not be disconnected from the daily reality of the people. V'yitchashvu ba, and this is the point I made, behachrautehem hamishpatit v'hilchatit, and they will consider the reality that they learn by spending time with the amcha, with the people, when they make their religious proclamations and they give their halachic answers. And finally, umeidach gisa sha'chevra ha'yehudit tilmad min hachachamim Torah umusar, that the people will learn, like I discussed, walking my Rebbe to Shir, will learn Torah and Musar, proper, ethical and moral behavior from them. So this disconnect, he writes about a disconnect between the intellectual elite and everyone else, could actually create what he calls a kera mazik ben chelkei hashonim shel hachevra, could create a real damaging rift between these two elements of the society. Hazikukim elu le'elu. They need each other, right? They really need each other to survive. So therefore, what Yossi ben Yoezer is saying is we have to create opportunities. This is the in Shinan's hands. This Mishnah is an anti-ivory tower anthem, right? Everyone. This is why I guess people talk about research hospitals. You got to be in a research hospital because the doctors are in with the patients and they are right. They're doing everything, and that's the way the yeshiva has to work, and that's why some people prefer the Aruch HaShulchan over the Mishnah Brura. Because the Aruch HaShulchan was a community rabbi, and the Chavetz Chaim was a Rosh Yeshiva. Chavetz Chaim is probably the more accepted posek, but some people say that one of the reasons why some may prefer the Aruch HaShulchan is because he was a community rabbi, and when he came to write his book, he came at it with a different understanding of the community. So beautiful analysis here by Shinan. Okay. Any other?
Can I just?
Yeah, please go ahead, Stacy.
I am absolutely loving this, and I'm hoping that you'll share the sources in that email or chat. It reminds me of I do Jewish equity, diversity, and inclusion for Jewish communities nationwide, and this is like, oh my goodness, this is early Jewish equity and diversity and inclusion. It's like it's built into the fabric of our Torah and our community, that we're always looking for ways to make sure that there's equity. I must take this back to my staff and my team. So this is
All right,
amazing.
So Stacy, I'm going to put my email in the chat, and then email me, and I'll send it to you. Okay.
Toda.
Okay. Okay. I want to do one more little piece here. Also, we're sticking with, now we're back to Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. That was Avigdor Shinan. And now we're back to Mishpat Eretz Yisrael. He makes a really interesting point here under the subcategory of Hitpashtut Limud HaTorah. He sees this, the Mishnah Eretz Yisrael sees this Mishnah as an example, an early example of spreading Torah in a broad way, like opening up sort of the Beit Midrash. More to your point, Stacy. So he says, Mishnatenu mashkefet et rashito shel tahalich hitpashtut shel limud Torah biparipheria. Got to be careful when you read these modern Hebrew commentaries, because they're writing English words in Hebrew. But the periphery, right? So this Mishnah, he says, is an early example, of an early attempt to spread Torah to the periphery of the Jewish world. B'tchila hitrakez halimud. Originally, learning was centralized. Bofen TV, it stayed with the intellectual elite. Be'ir habira u'bezika lamikdash. And it goes back to your point, Cheryl, in the capital and near the Mikdash, right, Jerusalem. Bishlav kolshu hechel halimud litpashet b'kfarim. At some point, Torah started spreading out to the villages. Chachamim nidreshu la'amim al atzmam et ol hanidudim v'hahora'ah hamizdamenet. So what happened? The Chachamim then needed places to be, right? If they're going to go teach in Sreda or in some other village where the infrastructure is not there, they need a place to be. ומשנתנו משקפת את המאמץ ליצור תשתית שתאפשר את קיומה של התנועה החדשה. So this Mishnah is an attempt to create the facts on the ground to allow Torah study to spread. And he goes on to give a couple of examples. We'll look at one of them that where halacha made room, or halacha ruled in a certain way to specifically, because it would allow Torah to spread. So it was a really interesting study that they go through here. He gives an example. Shemutar lifnot kupot shel teven b'Shabbat. So let's go back. I'll skip to this Mishnah. When we skip to this Mishnah, we'll come back. So the authors are saying that this Mishnah is an early example of trying to spread Torah to the periphery. And he says there are examples in halacha where halacha allowed things that would otherwise not have been allowed just for the purpose of spreading Torah. Fascinating. And what's one of the examples? From the Mishnah Masechet Shabbat, chapter 18, Mishnah 1, Mifanim afilu arba v'chamesh kupot shel teven v'shel tivua mifnei ha'orchim mifnei shel bitul beit hamidrash aval lo et ha'otzar. On Shabbat, one may move even 4 or 5 baskets of straw and baskets of produce due to the guests who require that place to sit and due to suspension of Torah study in the study hall where space is required to seat the students. So normally moving these things around would not have been allowed on Shabbat. We're not allowed to do that type of physical activity on Shabbat. But here you're allowed to move these heavy baskets of food in order to clear space so people could come together and study. And he gives some other examples. I think this is such a neat point. If the authors are correct here, that that halacha specifically ruled in ways to make study more available to people. And he gives a couple of more examples here. So down to the end here. Yosef ben Yoezer lo rak mishakef et hatofa'ah hu shotef pi'il hatomech b'talich hamavchani. He's part of this. Etzem ha'aron lahafitz et haTorah b'pshutei ha'am lo'oded limud lo'oded shmirat mitzvot. The idea of getting Torah out so people could study and people could observe mitzvot. Mahaveh mahafecha rabati b'tfisa chinuchit shel Am Yisrael. This is, they call this a revolution, right? In the educational system. Hey, Brian, in the educational system of the Jewish people. I couldn't find what he was talking about. I went back to look at Mishnah Yud. HaMishnah sham mashkefet et hahemshech shel oto talich v'sofo shel talich notzar am shomer mitzvot. V'ideal shel anashim pshutim hadvekim b'mitzvot v'lomdim Torah ki'ideal datim mishulav. And then this became the norm, and because learning far and wide became the norm, then Torah observance was more widespread. So I think it's a beautiful explanation of this Mishnah, and also explains why there was no meeting place, like I said earlier, because this is really going into the towns and the little villages where there was no place to study. But I'll just add one other point. I think that there's a parallel in contemporary times, and that is the revolution that's happened in Torah study for women, right? Torah, this represents a moving Torah into the periphery, but it was probably men, right? In our time, we've seen, took a while, but in our time, we've seen Torah move into another population where it wasn't fully engaged, and now it's fully engaged. And that's to women, and we see the same response, that once you make it available, people are thirsty for it, and so once you make it available, once it was made Torah Sheba Al Peh, serious Torah study was made available to women, women jumped at the chance, and women became more learned, and women became more connected to Torah, and more connected to mitzvot, and more connected to community more, right? Because it was missing, and then it was made available to them. So this, what he calls revolution, that really changed forever the Jewish view of education. The natural conclusion, I guess, was to make sure that all Jewish people were given access to the Torah, and that is something which we've experienced in our lifetime. I've actually I've commented on this before, and I'll end with this. Like in my own rabbinic career, I've seen the change. Like in my own when I started out, I did not have female colleagues, and now I have a ton. It's just so interesting, like to be on a listserv, which a few years ago was only men, and now there are women on it too. It's really something to just sort of get on the balcony. I think that's what the business people call it, and look at the whole picture of how the whole landscape has changed. It's really fascinating, and that's what's going on in this Mishnah, and it continued in our own lifetime. So this Mishnah is and there's much more, but that's what we're going to stop with today. The main points are that when we interact with Torah scholars, everyone's a winner. Hopefully we learn from their Torah wisdom and ethical and moral behavior, and they better understand the life of the people that they are leading so that they could lead them more accurately and more sensitively. And the other point of this represents spreading Torah into the periphery, which is something that we've seen, as I mentioned, in our lifetime, and something that we should really be committed to. Right? So it should be a commitment that Torah should be available to everybody. Whatever their particular approach is, whatever their physical or mental abilities are, whatever type of Torah they learn, right? Torah should, as a Jewish value, should be made available to everyone, and that's really that's a responsibility that we all have. Okay, I'll stop there. I don't know if there are any final comments or questions. David Endorsky is part of Spreading Torah. He does the Mishnah Club for the Kehillah kids, which is it's another population that needs early and sensitive and careful exposure to Torah. Right? If it's the right exposure, they'll fall in love with it for a lifetime. That's a lot of pressure, David, but we couldn't be happier that it's you. So that's right. Men, women, kids. Yeah. Brian, what do you want to say?
I wanted to apologize for being late. Time ran away. I was busy corresponding about Ben and Jerry's.
Okay.
And Unilever, the
Okay.
cousin of my son, cousin by marriage of my son, was the lead lawyer of the New Jersey case against Unilever, which has caused them to now divest themselves of Ben and Jerry Israel, which makes, but still have a relationship, which means that Ben and Jerry and Unilever is now again kosher.
Okay, great.
No more need for boycott.
I'm going to go out and get some Cherry Garcia right now. Okay, great.
Or Monkey Wrench.
Okay, any other who's on the bottom there? Phone Jaime Jones. Who is that? On the bottom of my screen. If you want to identify yourself. iPhone Jaime Jones. Anyone know who that is? Nope. Well, it was nice to have you. Okay. Nice to see you all. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. I will be in Denver next Shabbos, which is our last monthly visit. And then we're coming permanently at the beginning of August in Mirza Hashem. So very exciting for us. Stacy, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say Chodesh Tov.
Oh, that's right. Chodesh Tov as well. Thank you so much. Okay, great to see you all. Thank you for joining and thank you for your insights. And next time we're in Israel, we'll have to go visit Sreda and see where this beautiful Mishnah was developed. Okay, have a wonderful evening, everyone. Great to see you all. Bye-bye.
All right. Yorech Sameach.
Stacy, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.